These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Thom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. More info at teethhealth.com, code Thom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Thom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Thom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Thom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Thom.
And welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club, Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America by Michael Eric Dyson, who was a guest on our program a while back. This is from page 86. One of the great privileges of whiteness is not to see color, not to see race, and not to pay a price for ignoring it, except, of course, when you're called on it. But even then, the price pales quite literally in comparison to the high price black folk pay for being black. We pay a price too for not even being able to derive recognition and financial reward for the styles that make the world want to be black so bad that they don't mind looking like us as long as they never ever have to be us. If the appropriators can freely rip off our culture with no consequences, those who revise racial history, the fourth stage of white racial grief, are even less accountable for their deeds. The way of the racial revisionist when it comes to black life and history is simply to rewrite it. Their motto is, it didn't happen that way. There's a flood of writing that tells us that the Civil War wasn't really about slavery, but about an effort to defend states' rights. But, my friend, you've got to put yourself in our place and see the absurdity of such a claim. Defend the rights of states to do what? To enslave blacks. But even here, the irresistible logic of whiteness, that is irresistible to whites themselves, and to all of us who are subjected to white whim, springs into full action. White American history is so powerful that even when it loses, it wins, at least in skirmishes within whiteness itself. From the right wing, there is the belief that the Civil War was fought over the ability of individual states to beat back a federal government out to impose its will. From the left wing, there's the belief that the Civil War was a conflict between the planter class and the proletariat. In each case, race as the main reason for the war is skillfully rewritten, or really written out. Slavery is rewritten too. Some white Christian apologists contend that black folk needed slavery to save their souls or to rescue their cultures. A contemporary twist on this argument radiates in thinkers like Dinesh D'Souza, who claims that American blacks brought here through slavery are now doing far better than their African kin. Some white critics argue that since blacks sold other blacks into slavery, bondage was a black man's problem, not a white man's burden. But revisionists would much rather describe the dehumanization of black folk as little more than a commercial transaction. It's another way of washing their hands of racial responsibility. The effort to rewrite history surfaces in how Malcolm X is treated in the mainstream. It hardly seems likely that the culture he fought with all his heart could be depended on to grasp his true meaning. Malcolm is often read as an apostle of violence, as a frightful figure consumed by destructive rage. Yet the truth is far more complex, and Malcolm was far more complicated. But isn't the autobiography of Malcolm X so enduringly appealing because it shows Malcolm giving up hatred as a means to racial justice? Now, Malcolm X believed in the liberation of black folk from the mental and psychological chains of white supremacy. He was not committed to nonviolence as a way of life or as a method of social strategy. He believed that such a commitment prevents the full realization of black emancipation. Yet he was not personally violent. As Ossie Davis says in his eulogy, responding to the claim that Malcolm preached hate and was a fanatic and a racist, quote, "Did you even talk to Brother Malcolm? Was he ever himself associated with violence or any public disturbance?" End quote. The rage that flowed in Malcolm's veins was the rage against a force of whiteness that aimed to wash its black kin from the face of the earth. The urge to rewrite black history occasionally gives way to the final stage of white racial grief, which is simply, when it comes to race, dilute it. That is, to argue that black stuff doesn't just plague black folk. To summarize, bad stuff happens to everyone. This argument surfaced in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and that storm certainly hit black folk, but it hit white folk too. This is the sordid version of reverse American exceptionalism. It is the same Me Too impulse that flares in the bitter battle against affirmative action. Beloved, I can't help but notice that affirmative action is the bee in so many of your bonnets. You look around in your classrooms and you think every black person is there because they got an unfair shake from the system. You look at your job and you think that your black coworker got an unjust nod of approval from the powers that be. You never stop to think how the history of whiteness in America is one long scroll of affirmative action. You never stop to think that Babe Ruth never had to play the greatest players of his generation, just the greatest white players. You never stop to think that most of our presidents never rose to the top because they bested the competition, only just the white competition. White privilege is a self-selecting tool that keeps you from having to compete with the best. The history of white folk gaining access to Harvard, Princeton, or Yale is the history of white folk deciding ahead of the game that you are superior. You argue that slots in school should be reserved for your kin because, after all, they are smarter, more disciplined, better suited, and more deserving than inferior blacks. That's like concluding that the Cleveland Cavaliers can't possibly win the NBA championship because they're down 3-1 to the Golden State Warriors. Throw in the towel and call it a series. But they must play the series to determine the winner. Whiteness is having all the advantages on your side. The referee's blowing the whistle for you. The arena packed with only your fans. In fact, whiteness means you never even have to play the game at all, at least not in head-to-head matchups with the talent and skill of black folks. Here's We Cannot Stop by Michael Eric Dyson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We are getting right down to the wire. It's Thursday, and happy Thursday to you. Next Tuesday is the election, although, odds are we probably won't know the outcome for a few days, so, share that thought. But it is too late to get your ballot in the mail, thanks to Louis DeJoy and Donald Trump, so be sure that if you have not yet turned in your ballot, that you do so physically. We've got a big program today. In our third hour, we got a couple of science guests. Does Fukushima pose a threat to damage of human DNA? Shaun Burnie will be here. And we're going to be discussing healthcare as part of the climate solution. It's a real interesting study that was done in Indonesia. I'll tell you all about that in the third hour. In our second hour, Professor Richard Wolff is going to drop by. We're going to be talking about the economic numbers that Trump is waving around today and how they're relatively deceptive. And in the second hour, I want to get into April 18th was the day that Jared Kushner was recorded by Bob Woodward as saying that they had taken control of America back from the scientists. What happened in the week right around that, or the 2 weeks right around that led to that? It's a pretty shocking story, actually. But in our first hour, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal is with us for the hour, taking your calls at 202-808-9925. She is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. She represents the 7th District of the great state of Washington in the U.S. House of Representatives. Therefore, her website is Jayapal, Jayapal.house.gov, and you can tweet her at Rep. Jayapal. Representative Jayapal, welcome back to the program. So glad to have you with us. I'm curious, what's at the top of your list of things that we should all be thinking about and talking about today?
Well, I mean, obviously, Tom, first of all, it's great to see you. Great to be back on your show. The most obvious thing is we got to focus on the election. We have to get Donald Trump out of the White House. We've got to ditch Mitch. We've got to get a more progressive House in, because we have massive crises in front of us. Everything from COVID relief, health care, the rising surge in cases. Even here in Washington, we've handled it very well, but this virus is very persistent. We knew it was going to come back and keep coming back and forth on us. And so we've got to deal with the virus. We've got to get economic relief, and it's got to be at the scale of this crisis. And then there's just so much damage to undo from this president who on every level has violated justice, democracy, and our Constitution. So I'm thinking about, 5 days now from the election, but then we're also planning for how we make sure we get the most substantial set of structural reforms through, so that we are never, ever in not only the position we're in with COVID, but the position we were in before COVID hit, that made us so much more vulnerable on the economic and the health and really on the racial justice fronts.
You are one of the authors or co-authors of the Medicare for All legislation in the House of Representatives, and have been a champion of this for a long, long time. I mean, I have so much admiration and respect for you and everybody else in the Progressive Caucus, but in particular, you've been a real leader in this. The study out of Indonesia that I mentioned that we're going to be talking about in our third hour showed that when they brought free health care to poor Indonesian communities, it virtually stopped the illegal logging of the rainforest, because these people were basically vandalizing the forest in order to get money to pay for their own health care. I mean, it's amazing stuff. I mean, what are the prospects for Medicare for All in the United States? We've got a pandemic. We've got 200,000+ people dead. We've got 8 million, 9 million people infected. It seems like if ever there was a time, it's now.
No, that's absolutely right. And I can't wait to see that study. I lived in Indonesia for 10 years, so I actually know that area very, very well.
Oh, wow.
But this is the thing about healthcare, Tom. I don't think that people understand always how absolutely essential healthcare is to everything else you're doing. If you are not healthy, you can't get a decent job and keep a decent job and not have to worry. You can't take care of your kids. Your economic prospects are dim. You can't get the treatment you need, the drugs you need. And so I really think that's why we talk about healthcare as a human right. This is not something just for the privileged few. Without healthcare, you have nothing else. And so this is, I think this moment is our moment. Look, we, as much as both Republicans and some Democrats, unfortunately, have chosen to attack healthcare, that is the voice of the pharmaceutical drug companies and the private insurance companies that don't want anything to change because they've got a lot at stake. They've made a huge amount of profits that have only gone up, by the way, during COVID-19. And so we have to just understand that the American people are with us in poll after poll, study after study. In spite of hundreds of millions of dollars coming in to attack Medicare for All, it is a very resilient idea. And it is winning even in blue states. We saw that, blue districts, I should say. We saw that last cycle in 2018 when people like Katie Porter and Mike Levin and so many others ran and won on Medicare for All. We're seeing it this cycle. Hopefully, we will win these seats with people like Cara Eastman, Dana Balter, Mike Siegel, so many others, Julie Oliver, so many others that are running on Medicare for All in extremely tough Republican districts. And just the other day, a Republican constituent wrote to me, and this is reminding me I need to write him back. I was so excited to get his email. And he said he thinks the Republican Party leaders are all wrong in attacking Medicare for All. He's a Republican with conservative ideals, but the idea that everyone should be able to afford health care and that the government should provide it in a single-payer system is exactly what he thinks needs to happen. And for small businesses, which he talked about, this is critical. We're hampering and hamstringing small businesses. So what's the prospect? I was the co-chair of the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force on Healthcare. Senator Sanders asked me to do that. I said to him, Burnie, and, he got a start on your show in many ways, Tom, but I said to him, we are not going to turn Biden into Bernie Sanders. We're not going to get Medicare for all from Joe Biden because his stake in the sand, if you will, his legacy is the Affordable Care Act. But I do believe we can get significant foundational principles of Medicare for all into the Biden platform, and that is what we did. I consider those negotiated agreements for the Biden campaign the floor. I told the vice president I'm never going to stop pushing for Medicare for all, but we did get some very critical things. First of all, pharmaceutical drug pricing, an aggressive plan, even better than what we were able to get in the House that we negotiated. My co-chair Mark Pocan and I and others negotiated in H.R. 3. What we got in the Biden platform is even better. And so we will literally be able to say no American will pay more for their pharmaceutical drugs than in any other country. That's first. Secondly, we untethered health care from jobs. We didn't do it the way I would like to do it by making sure that there is no private insurance, policies with employers, that everyone is on Medicare for all. But what we were able to get is a commitment that, number one, employers would have to offer a government plan as one of their options. And number two, if anybody is unemployed, as happened to 27 million Americans during this COVID crisis, that they would automatically be put onto a government plan. Number three, lowering the Medicare age. I would like to lower it to 55. We got lowering it to 60. That's a beginning. I would like to make sure we're covering all kids. And the Biden plan does that somewhat through their subsidies. But there's more to do, and I think we'll be able to really push for this, Tom, in the next Congress, if we are able to take back the Senate and the White House and get a more progressive House elected.
That is so encouraging. It's great to have good news. We're talking with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, who is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. She's here with us for the hour, taking your calls. We'll be right back with her in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And we've got callers from all over the country stacked up. They will be talking to Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal in just a moment. Stick around. We'll be right back with Representative Jayapal. And welcome back. Mike in Seattle, you are on the air with Representative Jayapal.
Hi, Representative Jayapal. You're my representative. I'm in the 34th LD in West Seattle. So isn't the most important date for this election really when states do the voter certification and not the day of the tally that everybody reports on?
Mike, first of all, that's my LD, so yay, West Seattle. Every day in this election is going to be important because we actually don't know what dates different states are going to do their final tallies. And so this is an unprecedented time. We even saw, even though we won the Pennsylvania Supreme Court case that came down yesterday, what troubles me about that is it leaves open the possibility that the Supreme Court could still make a decision on ballots that come in after Election Day. And that decision could come after Election Day, which to me seems absolutely unjust. And so, we are still telling voters in Pennsylvania, for example, do not trust the mail at this point. Please go to a ballot box. Go to your government office and put your ballot in a verified ballot box or vote in person safely with a mask. Because I see the Republican Party, the Trump administration, using shenanigans of legal suits all the way up to the election and then, of course, after. So I don't know what the final date is because even with those final tallies, there are things we have heard of afoot to challenge even those final tallies. So I would say let's focus on now in the election. Let's get our ballots in person or in a ballot box, if at all possible. And I think that is, we're just going to have to take this one step at a time, but prepare ourselves for what might come.
Jessica in Chicago watching Free Speech TV. We have about a minute and a half to the break.
Shoot.
Quick question, Jessica?
Hi to both of you. Yes, I voted in person, and I wish I hadn't. The machines, the screens print out, you hand in a barcode. And so I, after I came home, I Googled the machine I voted on and the barcode, and they can be hacked into easily, and the barcode can be changed.
Yeah, Jessica, this is really important. I mean, we hope that states can, that you can get a copy, a printout of your ballot and exactly how you voted, because I think we are worried about some election machines and foolery that can happen there. You know, in the state of Washington, in Oregon and Colorado, where we have mail-in ballots, it's a really good way you can track whether your ballot's been counted. There's a paper trail of those ballots. I mean, there's a lot of things in place. And unfortunately, we haven't updated the systems of all of the states as we move to this mail-in voting. So I would just say, I believe you can always call your county to see what your ballot said and how it was counted or tracked. And I believe that you have access to that information even in a state like yours.
That's great. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal with us, taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more calls for Representative Jayapal in just a moment. She represents the 7th District of the state of Washington in the U.S. House of Representatives. Jayapal.house.gov. Your Twitter handle is Rep. Jayapal. And she, of course, is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. In our special video over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program, the one today is for anybody who has any connection, or for this week, anybody who has any connection with the military or anybody in the military who might still think that Donald Trump is a good guy. And I'm going through, like, I don't know how many, 20, 30, 40, 50 individual data points of times when Trump has trashed our troops, when Trump has deported troops, when Trump has deported military spouses who aren't citizens, when Trump has lied to our troops, when Trump has, specifically pulled money from our troops. I mean, he took money out of military housing, which is in some parts of the country, mold infested and really in a crisis, to build his border wall that Mexico is supposed to pay for. That's just one example. So there's a whole list of these things in that new video that's available over at ThomHartmann.com, especially for anybody you know who has any consideration or concern at all for our U.S. military. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We're doing a national town hall meeting for our first hour of the program today with Representative Pramila Jayapal, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing Washington's 7th District in the U.S. House. Number is 202-808-9925. And John in Austin, Texas, you are on the air with Representative Jayapal.
How you doing, guys? I'd like to first say thanks for everything that you guys do. My question revolves around voting. Every 4 years and sometimes every 2 years, depending on the election, there are long lines because they reduce voting machines. There's all kinds of different chicanery going on in a lot of states. So my question would be, is there a way or is there a possibility that somebody can introduce some legislation that would strengthen the federal elections so that everybody who is eligible to vote can vote during the elections, that there's no chicanery and taking down machines to one per each county and stuff like that? Because it seems like every year or every election that there's always this, suppression of the vote. And, just like we're having now, can there be some type of guidelines put in place so that everybody can vote every single election?
Yeah, this is a really important question. And actually, I sit on the Judiciary Committee, John, and we have over and over again for the last 4 years been trying to move our legislation, not only the Voting Rights Advancement Act, but also the For the People Act, and another piece of legislation, the Voter Election Integrity Act, I think it's called, all of which is designed to address exactly what you're talking about. The Trump administration has deliberately undermined elections, but it was already not up to where it should have been in terms of investment even before that. And so what we need to do is put a clean set of guidelines in place for states across the country. I mean, elections are run by states. However, the federal government can give money to ensure election security. In my mind, that's part of intelligence, right? It's part of FBI. We've questioned Director Christopher Wray on this when he was before us in the Judiciary Committee. And so we need to make sure that those very clear guidelines are in place, that we vet appropriately the makers of these machines. I'm very troubled by the fact that there are people who make ballots or who make machines that are, clear partisan entities, and we don't know, are they doing the right thing or not? We've seen instances where that's been a problem. And number three, we need to give money to the states to dramatically update their election systems because of cyber attacks and other things that we know have been happening. Now, separate from all of that, there's making sure that we don't have foreign interference in our elections. But a lot of that comes down to the cybersecurity that is not in place in many systems across the country. So we have proposed all of that legislation. The Republicans have refused to move on any of it, even though the FBI and others, the Department of Justice, have said that this is a serious threat to our democracy and to our national security.
Representative Jayapal, if I could add on a question to that. The Supreme Court ruled that we have an absolute right to buy and own a gun. And therefore, if the government wants to prevent you or me or anybody else from buying a gun, they actually have to go to court and prove their case that we shouldn't be able to buy a gun because it's a right, not a privilege. Voting, the Supreme Court ruled back in the 2000 Bush v. Gore, is a privilege, not a right. And so the government can take that away from us anytime we want, and then we have to go to court and demand it back, as we're seeing the NAACP suing all over the country, Wouldn't establishing an absolute right to vote, which that phrase, right to vote, appears 4 times in the Constitution. It's in the preamble and the black law body of the Motor Voter Act of 1993, I think it is, maybe 97. But it's never been adjudicated, and it's rarely recognized. Wouldn't that be a really important first step?
That's a really interesting point. I mean, I guess I have always felt like the right to vote is enshrined in our Constitution, but you're right. The Supreme Court has been interpreting that in a very different way. And so I'm going to look into that, Tom, but I think that could be a very simple thing. It may already be in the Voting Rights Act. I need to go back and look. But if not, I think that is a very important thing to make it clear to the Supreme Court that this is a right and not a privilege. You can't have a democracy without everyone being able to cast a vote. And so I think that is a really important point, and very frustrating given, the hypocrisy of the way that the court rules on different things that have now become so partisan.
Yeah, we just have 35, 40 seconds to the break. But it is crazy that the court has said, you have a right to own a gun, but not a right to vote. I mean,
No.
like that. It reminds me of, the old Eve of Destruction song back in the 60s. You may not be old enough to remember this, but it was "you're old enough to kill, but not for voting" was the phrase. And that got a constitutional amendment pushed through Congress and the states in less than 4 months to lower the voting age to 18.
Yeah. No, that's right. And, I think what's also crazy about all of this is that this wasn't a partisan thing the way it is today. I mean, in our state, I wrote the automatic voter registration bill. It passed after I left the Senate. But I had 2 Republican secretaries of state saying, yes, we should do this. This makes sense. We should make sure that everybody, that we make it as easy as possible for people to vote. This is fundamental to democracy.
Right. Amen. We'll be back with more of your calls for Representative Pramila Jayapal in just a moment.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We have about a 5-minute news break here at the bottom of the hour, and we will be back with your calls for the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Representative Pramila Jayapal. Today we're reading from Behold America by Sarah Churchwell, The Entangled History of America First and the American Dream. This is from the prologue. On Monday, 30 May 1927, a cool day with showers forecast, New Yorkers were gathering for the annual Memorial Day parades around the city. It was only 9 years since the end of the European War, into which America had been so reluctantly drawn, and Europe had suddenly become closer than ever before. Precisely 10 days earlier, Charles Lindbergh had completed the first solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, and no one had yet stopped celebrating. Front pages around the country reported that Lucky Lindy had been mobbed in London, greeted by rapturous crowds of 150,000. Few Americans were talking about much else than the newest national hero, but in New York that day, different kinds of mobs were about to gather. Around 8 a.m., a group of Italian immigrants living in the Bronx set out for the elevated train on their way to Manhattan to join the parade. But they were not going to honor the American soldiers who had died in the service of their country. They were supporters of Mussolini, planning to join 400 American fascists who were marching in Manhattan's Memorial Day parade as part of the official fascist movement in the United States. They had been invited by the parade's organizers, to the outrage of many anti-fascists, including Italian nationalists and anarchists who threatened violence if the invitation wasn't rescinded. It wasn't. Like all his fellow fascists intending to march that day, Joseph Carisi was wearing the black shirt uniform, sporting leather boots, jodhpurs, a black cap, and carrying a steel-tipped riding crop. When he stopped to buy a newspaper, Carisi was jumped by two men, stabbed in the neck, and left to die on the sidewalk. Another fascist, Nicholas Amoroso, who was running either to catch up with his group or away from the killers, reports vary, was shot 4 times, once right through the heart. One of the 2 murdered men had served in the American Army during the Great War, the other with the Italian Army, papers reported. The parade they had meant to join took place without them, a fascist delegation of several hundred that was guarded by police to, quote, avert disorder. After the parade, the American black shirts returned to their headquarters in the heart of Times Square. There, another of the fascists standing outside was set upon by 3 men. He defended himself with his riding crop as his fellow black shirts charged out, brandishing clubs and whips, chasing the assailant through the theater traffic in Times Square, who fled as the black-shirted mob tore through the traffic. 100 fascists, reported the New York Times, rushed the attackers. A melee ensued that was quickly dispersed by the police. There was also violence in Brooklyn, where a parade of fascisti marched from the Angelo Rizza Fascista League at 274 Troutman Street in Bushwick. The LA Times reported several hundred men were parading, including 40 or 50 in the black shirt uniform. Fights broke out between supporters and protesters mingling on the sidewalks, and an anti-fascist was found lying on the ground, stabbed in the back. He survived and identified a fascist as his assailant. Accompanied by 30 police reserves to forestall violence, the marchers made their way through Brooklyn, stopping at the Wilson Avenue station, where the fascisti came to attention and gave the fascist salute. They ended at a Roman Catholic church, where the priest blessed them under large American and Italian flags, while the police remained on guard. The biggest outbreak of violence that Memorial Day, however, occurred in Queens, where it centered around a different right-wing group, not Italian Americans, but the self-proclaimed 100% American kind. By 1927, the Ku Klux Klan had spread across the United States since its rebirth in Georgia 12 years earlier. The first Klan was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, as former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee created a secret society to promote white supremacism, and terrorize the newly freed slaves in the South during the Reconstruction era. The name is generally believed to have originated from the Greek word for circle, kuklos, while Klan pays homage to the mystified Celtic heritage supposedly shared by white Southerners. Within a decade or two, the first Klan had been successfully suppressed by law enforcement and died out by the turn of the century. But in 1915, it was resuscitated in Georgia, and by the early 1920s, the second Klan had achieved a powerful political presence in the United States, not only in the South, but across the country. I would add this is because of 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation came out. The Klan had an active presence in New York City and Long Island by 1927, with favorite slogans, which they even attempted to copyright at various points. That year, the Klan was calling attention to the fact that it first announced the program of 100% Americanism and of America First. They were not, in fact, the first to adopt these mottos, as this book will show. In 1927, both phrases had been around for a decade or more. But as far as the Klan busily copywriting hate was concerned, America First belonged to them. And on Memorial Day in Queens, 1,000 or so of them had gathered to march, many in white robes and hoods. They were accompanied by 400 women from the so-called Clavana, the feminine branch of the Klan. Some of the reported 20,000 spectators in Queens that day objected to the Klan's presence as others defended their right to march. Scuffles broke out, and it turned into a riot. Women fought women, and spectators fought the policemen and the Klansmen as their desire dictated, said a newspaper. Klan banners were shredded, and 5 of their number were arrested, said initial reports, while a few others were caught up in the confusion as well. The book, Behold America, Sarah Churchwell. In the science revolution this week, how does a nation best deal with a leader who intentionally kills its citizens? Also, Kelsey Lamp with Environment America is here reporting on the new American blueprint for our oceans. This could be a sea change. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear drops by on how more Fukushima water is being released into the Pacific Ocean. And in geeky science, how a Green New Deal could save hundreds of thousands of lives. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We're doing a national town hall meeting today with the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Representative Pramila Jayapal of the 7th District of Washington State in the U.S. House of Representatives, and Dee in Chicago. You're on the air with Representative Jayapal.
Good morning, Representative Jayapal and Tom. Thank you for great works. Representative, is there a way to change the rules or the laws in terms of senators being able to hold up everything? Mitch McConnell has held us hostage. I don't understand how just that person in the Senate can hold up over 300 wonderful laws that you guys have passed.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I really think we need reforms to our courts. I think we need reforms to our Senate. I just believe that the way that these rules have been used are completely absurd, and Republicans have no shame. There was a process that used to be, it's called the blue slip process for judges. And if a home state senator put down a blue slip, the sort of idea was that you wouldn't move forward. Republicans have done away with that completely. And I think what happens when Democrats get in, we say, well, we really want to do things the right way. We want to go back to a time when there was bipartisanship. And of course, we all want to see the country heal after this racist, xenophobic, constitutional destroying president and the party that has enabled him. But we are going to have to put in place different kinds of structures that allow us to pass critical bills the way that Republicans have done with no shame whatsoever. So, we talk about filibuster reform. I said a long time ago that I was for filibuster reform because Republicans have already done that. They've already reformed the filibuster for things like their $2 trillion tax cut, right? And so we've got to make sure that we are really thinking about structural reforms, and that will include to the Senate and to our entire judicial system, not just the Supreme Court. But remember that Donald Trump has made hundreds of appointments to lower courts with judges that have been rated as unqualified. They are pure partisan ideologists. They are literally have no relevant experience to being a judge and no interest in actually administering justice. So we have a lot of work to do, and I hope Democrats take it seriously. I'm going to be pushing for that from the Progressive Caucus side, but we need the entire movement across the country to be pushing to say, yeah, let's restore balance, because you want to talk about packing the courts. The Republicans have already packed the courts, and we are just going to have to figure out how to bring balance back into all of those structures, including the Senate.
Charles in Jacksonville, Florida. You're on the air with Representative Jayapal.
Yes, good afternoon. I have a quick question, Congresswoman. In the future immigration legislation, could you include a clause that any undocumented individual that serves 4 years in the U.S. military and is discharged honorably is granted the right to citizenship if they so requested?
Yeah, actually, thank you for that question, Charles. It already exists that if you go into service, you are supposed to have the promise of citizenship. And that is something that the Trump administration has gone back on. They have found other ways to try to deport people. They have deported the surviving spouses and family of people who have served in the military, thinking that they were going to have the promise of that citizenship, and then they're killed protecting our country and standing up for our country. And then the U.S. government under the Trump administration has deported those individuals. So we already had that in place. It just has been violated and withdrawn by the Trump administration. We will make sure that when Democrats take back the presidency and hopefully the Senate, that we pass true comprehensive immigration reform that includes our veterans, that includes our DACA recipients, that includes families that want to be kept together. There is a report that's going to be released today that I'll just preview it. I hope this is okay for me to do this. I know it's coming out later today. It's going to say that 500,000 children were held in detention. That is both unaccompanied minors that came across the border and those that came with their families. But almost 500,000 were held in detention, 40% for more than 72 hours. This is a travesty beyond travesties. So we are going to have to dramatically reform our immigration system, including our detention system. I have a bill called the Dignity for Detained Immigrants Act that gets rid of private for-profit prisons. Nobody should be making a profit on incarcerating immigrants. And by the way, that's your taxpayer dollars that are being used for that. And we could take care of folks with alternatives to detention. People do not need to be incarcerated when they're just waiting for a bond hearing or waiting for their papers to go through, coming through as asylees or refugees. So there's a lot of work we have to do. You know, I'm passionate about this issue, been an organizer on it for 15 years, so it's hard for me not to just, what we've done to immigrants in this country is so grotesque from the Trump administration, and the detention of children, of kids, is first and foremost in that. The caging of kids is just unbearable to me to think about the long-term, irreversible damage that we have done to almost 500,000 kids.
That's mind-boggling. Gerald in San Diego, California. You're on the air with Representative Jayapal.
Hello. Thank you so much. First-time caller, long-time listener. Thank you, Representative Jayapal. I love you so much. I think you're awesome. I come from a time where it was a death sentence politically to say that you are progressive, and Tom's talked about this a lot. That has changed dramatically. How many members of the CPC caucus are just using the moniker of progressive to get elected, and how does this affect the ability to present a united front and building a coalition? Because I don't hear from many of them like I hear from you.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm the elected co-chair, so obviously you probably hear from me more in terms of these progressive ideals. But look, we have grown rapidly. When the CPC was formed several decades ago by Bernie Sanders, Pete DeFazio, Maxine Waters, and some others, it was more of a social club. It was a place where people could come and talk about progressive ideals, but there weren't that many people talking about it, as you say. And over the years, we have continued to strengthen the CPC. Keith Ellison and Raul Grijalva were key to kind of bringing some structures back in during the last governing moment. Mark Pocan, my fantastic co-chair, who's often on Thom Hartmann, I think has a weekly thing with Thom Hartmann, so you hear him all the time. And I have really continued to bring structure. And we are actually in the process right now, you may have read, of trying to pass a significant reforms package that is about bringing a little bit more structure, allowing the CPC to be more effective, more nimble, and also, holding people accountable to some extent if you want to say that you're progressive. So we have a number of proposals that are out there, and they're everything from minimum requirements for attendance in our meetings, responding to whip counts, but also the ability to make the CPC more member-driven so that any member could seek the CPC to take a position on a piece of legislation that's coming to the floor we already have a process for endorsement of bills. This is different. If there's a piece of legislation on the floor or an amendment, the CPC could take a position as long as 2/3 of our members support that position. And but then 2/3 of the time, you would actually need to vote with the caucus position. So this isn't, it's not inflexible for different districts across the country. I mean, we do have people that run as progressives in swing districts, God bless them, and they do have more challenges than some of us that are in blue districts. So we want to recognize that. But we also want there to be accountability, more member-driven nature, and participation at the end of the day. So, I hope that these reforms will go through. I'm looking forward to having the CPC. It's really important that we prepare for this governing moment. And the progressive movement and the progressive caucus inside is going to be absolutely critical to making sure that we get the kinds of bold structural changes that we've been advocating for. I think Tom has heard me say before that my definition of a progressive is just that we are the first to the best and most just ideas. And then everyone else has to run to catch up with us because we build the movement that changes what is seen as possible. So 10 years ago when I was on the committee that helped make Seattle the first major city to pass a $15 minimum wage, it was not mainstream to talk about a $15 minimum wage. Now, the entire House of, the House of Representatives and almost the entire Democratic caucus passed the Raise the Wage Act last year to raise the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, to 15. So we know what it's like to build a movement and to be perhaps ahead of our time in some ways. But we've got to get money out of politics. We've got to get people working for their people if we're going to really have the kind of justice that we deserve in America.
Amen. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal is with us for the hour, taking your calls. She's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 17th District of the state of Washington. Jayapal, Jayapal.house.gov is her website, and you can tweet her at Rep. Jayapal. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where smart people get their news. We'll be back with your calls for Representative Jayapal in just a moment. And welcome back. Donna in Bonnie Lake, Washington, you are on the air with Representative Jayapal.
Thank you so much, the two of you. I'm a PCO in the 34th LD, 31st, I mean. Sorry about that. But if, let's say after the election, we win back one of the other branches, what are the Democrats able to do at that point? Would we be able to stop the Republicans from some of the things they're trying to do, or get a couple of them to, change their votes and vote with us? What would that look like?
Well, first of all, if we take back the Senate and we have the White House, it's not just a remarkable opportunity, it's a responsibility for Democrats to deliver on some of the things we've already committed to. Now, you get some sense of what the Democratic agenda is just by looking at the first 9 bills that the Democratic House this last cycle passed. H.R. 1, For the People Act, that's to get money out of politics. H.R. 3, that's pharmaceutical drug pricing. As I said, I think we can get a more aggressive bill on that. H.R. 6, the most progressive Dream and Promise Act ever in the history of our country. And so we can, the Raise the Wage Act, another one, I forget what the number was. And so we can go through these bills, and these are bills that have already gotten a Democratic House to approve them. Some we can make stronger. That is possible as well. The stop for us has been a Republican Senate. Now, I believe that we can get Democratic senators, and we're going to have to push if there's any problem here, to pass many of these key bills quickly because they've already gotten support in the House. And we should be able to deliver an even more progressive Democratic House if all goes well in this election. And then, of course, if we have a Democratic president, these bills can then be signed into law. We have to hold tough. We Democrats have to remember that Trump is both a symptom and a problem. He is a problem of tremendous suffering and injustice, but he is also a symptom of many working people across this country in rural and urban districts, red and blue districts, feeling like the Democrats hadn't done enough for them as well. And those people either voted for Trump when they had voted for Obama before, or they sat home. I think of people, Democratic base voters, young people, progressives, folks of color, immigrants, who stay home as also being a very important swing voter. We always talk about moderates and independents as being the swing voters, but I think of our base as being swing voters because we don't always speak to them. And so we have to energize people to help them to understand that we really are for the people. We're not for those 500 lobbyists that line our doors. We're for the people, and we are going to raise the wage. We are going to get gender equity. We're going to pass paid sick leave. We're going to invest in child care for every American. We're going to invest in infrastructure, the Moving Forward Act that Democrats passed on the floor, to invest in our systems, our roads, our bridges, our internet, all of those things, rural broadband. Those are the things that we have to do, and we have to do it quickly.
Representative Jayapal will be back in just a second, continuing to take your calls. She's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 7th District of Washington in the U.S. House. You can help America return to democracy by telling friends and family how to listen to this and other great progressive programs. Tag you're it. So what makes Trump supporters Trump supporters? Good question, right? Well, Psychology Today did a deep dive into a whole bunch of literature on this and a number of studies and concluded that there were 5 characteristics that crossed right across virtually all Trump supporters. I do a deep dive on these on our video over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program today. But here's essentially what it says. Number 1, they are authoritarians, by and large authoritarian followers. They want a strong father figure to make them feel safe. Number 2, social dominance orientation. They believe in a caste system and they think they should be in the top caste. Number 3, prejudice. They view people of other races poorly. Number 4, intergroup contact. Most of them have never experienced significant contact with people of another race or people, deeply different than them. And number 5, relative deprivation. They feel like they've been screwed. They're not sure why. And Trump tells them, oh, it's those brown people. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Taking your calls for Representative Jayapal and David in Dallas, Texas. You're on the air.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Representative. I am concerned about blue dog Democrats. I don't know if you remember the blue dogs from 2009 and 2010 and how much effect they had on the Affordable Care Act. But I wonder are there going to be still blue dog Democrats, which in effect are Republicans? Are they still going to exist? If they do, what are we going to do about them? Because they vote like Republicans, even though they call themselves Democrats.
Yeah, the Blue Dog Caucus still exists. There are 3 ideological caucuses: the Progressive Caucus, which represents just about 40% of the Democratic caucus in this Congress; the New Dems, which is slightly larger than the Progressive Caucus; and the Blue Dogs, which is a fairly small but very influential caucus because they've had enough votes to sometimes block things from coming to the floor or to water down legislation. Look, it depends on how many votes we have. If we win a number of the red to blue seats that progressives are running in, I'm talking about Kara Eastman in Nebraska, Dana Balter in New York, 3 seats in Texas, that are progressives who are running, Beth Doglio in Washington 10, for those of you who are in Washington. We need to win those seats and bring some of those progressives in, and they will be very influential. But a lot depends on how many votes we need and what the final makeup is. So I will say that we were able to get many of these bills that I'm talking about, these progressive priorities around the Dream and Promise Act, the Raise the Wage Act, the For the People Act, through the Democratic caucus, with almost every Democrat voting for it. And they're still more progressive than we've ever been before. So I do have hope that we can work across the Democratic caucus to bring people in and to prevent the blocking or the undermining of legislation. So we're working on that now. The stronger and more united the progressive movement is, both on the outside and on the inside, the more we can keep our CPC members together when we need to take a position, the better success we will have in that effort.
Janet in Mount Vernon, Washington. You're on the air with Representative Jayapal.
Good morning, Tom. Good morning, Representative Jayapal. On Monday, I believe it was, Tom had on former Siegelman, who is always a pleasure to hear. He was arguably maybe one of our first political prisoners in this country and left in jail far longer than he should have been. He brought up a really important point, and that is Karl Rove has apparently been brought on to do all sorts of evil things to make sure the Republicans win this election. And my question for you is, with all of the terrible things that are going on that are getting no attention, like the head of NOAA being, those heads being removed and replaced with political hacks, and the dismantlement of the civil service hierarchy, where's Bill Barr? Do you have any idea? Because it seems to me like he's busy working to dismantle things as much as he can before hopefully a blue wave. And I pray, you have to understand, I can't be alone. I wake up in the middle of the night and I am worried. I am worried, and believe me, we were trying to flip that Senate. If I get a request for, my husband and I get a request for a Democratic Senate someone running against a Republican, we send them money. So many people
Janet,
we wake up terrified.
Let's let Representative Jayapal answer the question, okay?
Yeah, no, I hear the anxiety, Janet, and that's why for anyone that's listening, if you have time between now and the election, go to PramilaForCongress.com. We are running phone banks into Pennsylvania, a very critical state, and also into Washington 10, another critical race that we need a progressive to win. And we have trained over 550 volunteers in deep canvassing training. At this point, it's GOTV, but we've made over 125,000 phone calls. Don't leave anything on the table. We really need to be able to wake up the morning after the election and say, each one of us did everything possible to win this election. And I believe that fundamentally I feel qualitatively different this time than I did in 2016. That said, we're not leaving anything on the table. I think that Bill Barr, you've probably seen me questioning Bill Barr. I am, I just think he is not an attorney general for the country. He is the president's personal attorney. He does nothing to uphold the Constitution. In fact, he tears it down. He when I questioned him, he lied to me under oath in saying that he didn't know anything about what was happening in Michigan and the protesters that were at the state capitol with right-wing protesters with, assault rifles and swastikas and a brown-haired doll that was supposed to represent Gretchen Whitmer. 3 of those protesters that were at the Michigan Capitol when the Attorney General said he didn't know anything about it were actually 3 of the people that were arrested in the plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan. And yet he told me he didn't know anything about it. What he focuses on is the ridiculousness of trying to tear gas and
I'm sorry, we're out of time here.
Yeah,
but thank
you.
You're listening
Thank you.
to
That's okay. Thank you so much.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code TOM. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until at last we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits in that secret a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate healthcare has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest health care program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith.
I believe beyond any doubt that single payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of healthcare. I believe this healthcare is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are health care. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer health care is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people, and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18 and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust. Joanne Reed's book, The Man Who Sold America.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. On the line with us, our old buddy, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, author of numerous books, his latest, Understanding Socialism, democracyatwork.info, rdwolff with 2fs.com, and his Twitter handle, Prof. Wolff, as in Professor, Prof. Wolff with 2Fs. And Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program. Thank you so much for hanging out with us so regularly. I'm looking at the tweet from Donald Trump saying, "Whoa, 30% growth in GDP, we are rocking," or words to that effect. And then I'm looking at Justin Walfer's reply to that tweet. He's a professor of economics at the Ford School at the University of Michigan. And he says the GDP rose by 7.4% after falling 9% in the previous quarter. All told, the economy is 3.5% smaller than at the end of 2019. He said, for context, that's roughly, that's far below its peak in the darkest days of the recession of 2008. So what's the real story here? I'm getting whiplash.
Well, it's a sort of shameless huckstering that we've come to expect from Mr. Trump after all these years. He takes a number, yanks it out of any context in order to present an argument that nobody with even a little bit of understanding would waste time on. Here's what happened. The economy tanked very badly since March. Everybody knows that. What happened was, over the summer, there was this effort, which we now understand terribly misguided, to get us, quote unquote, back into the economy. All around the world, but especially here in America, restaurants reopened and museums reopened, at least to some extent. We're going to get back into the economy. And so we brought a lot of people back under conditions that weren't safe, hadn't been made safe enough. But we did get 3 months during the summer, the that quarter of uptick, and that's what he's talking about. But the uptick wasn't even close to undoing the collapse that had happened in the 3 months starting around the middle of March. So we are behind where we were at the end of 2019. We are an economy fully in recession/depression. And not only that, but the upturn that he is celebrating doesn't include the month of October, which we're now ending, and in that month, every single indicator, employment, production, you name it, is down again. So we saw a collapse, we saw coming back up a little bit, and now we're heading down again as the corona numbers are coming in. So this is just an attempt, a desperate attempt of a politician in trouble to make something out of what is, in fact, very bad news.
How is the average person who's not an economist and doesn't, have a fingertips grasp of this kind of stuff? How do we know what the economy is actually doing? I mean, for years and years, it's been sold to us the idea that the indicator of the health of the American economy is the stock market. Well, we know that that's not the case. And now Trump is pitching, well, it's GDP numbers. Those are the magic numbers. What really should we be looking at?
It's a little bit like the metaphor of a doctor. If you went to a doctor and all he did was, or she did, was to put a thermometer in your mouth, you would not go to that doctor again, because you know that one measure, one index, one calculation doesn't capture the complexity of the health of your body. So you need lots of different tests, and you have to have somebody who understands it explain it to you, somebody you can have confidence in who will tell you, these are the signs that you're in good shape, these are the signs that you've got some problems, here's the best explanation we have, and here's the treatment that we would suggest. We don't have anything like that in our political life. We have politicians desperate to twist and spin anything that's going on to make them look good. Think of it as advertising. When you have an advertiser, all he does is tell you about how good the product is that's paying him. He doesn't tell you its flaws. He doesn't tell you its problems. It's dishonesty writ large, and we're supposed to kind of know it, that it's advertising. But we are, in fact, affected by it. I'm afraid our politics is just another form of advertising in which everybody is trying to grab your attention to tell a story that may or may not have any supporting evidence whatsoever, but believe me, they'll come up with something that they can say positive.
Yeah. You and I talked a few months ago about how the Fed was basically manufacturing money out of thin air and using that money to buy corporate bonds. In other words, to loan money to giant publicly traded corporations, and then later even buying their stock to support their stock in the stock market. Is that still going on? And it's been a while since we talked about it. What's your sense of where that might lead? What is the consequence of this kind of behavior by the Fed? And is anybody, waving some alarms about this?
There are beginning to be alarms raised. First of all, to answer your question, the Federal Reserve is continuing to make credit available, massive amounts of credit at virtually zero interest rate, just above zero, to America's largest corporations. The only honest way to describe that is that American capitalism, corporate capitalism, is now on life support. It is dependent on the Federal Reserve printing money and making it available at almost no cost to keep these companies going, and that's what is keeping them going. Just like the provision of low-interest money is keeping the stock market going, as people can buy stocks with borrowed money that costs them nothing, so they continue to do it, because the Federal Reserve has basically signaled that if anything happens to undercut the companies, or anything happens to undercut their share prices, in will come the Federal Reserve with even more money. The anxiety now is precisely because everybody knows what I just said, who's in the corporate world. Every company is borrowing money to beat the band. Whatever your problem is as a company, even if what you have to sell is of no interest to anybody anymore, you can get by for another quarter, for another year, by simply borrowing money. It has become the cheapest, easiest way to go to the government to get bailed out, not because there's a crisis, but simply on an ongoing basis. And the anxiety that's beginning to be articulated by even members of the Federal Reserve Board is that we are developing an economy that is unsustainable, that these companies can never pay back the amount of money they owe. They can't earn that in a depressed economy, and that therefore we have, and we even have a new term for it, I'm sure you know it, Tom, zombie corporations. Corporations whose profits now are simply inadequate, simply to cover the interest that they have to pay. And if the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, which it may have to do in the years ahead, well, then these companies are simply going to go belly up, and people are very afraid if that happens, you're going to see the crash of this economy that has only been postponed by what the Federal Reserve is doing.
We just have 20 seconds. Couldn't the Fed just as easily have rolled over student debt and now everybody's paying 0% interest rate on student debt?
Absolutely. They could have and they should have. Here's another scandal. They could have and should have funded the states and the cities. Because of our unemployment, because of COVID, they don't have any money to do this public support that we need desperately. The Federal Reserve didn't do it, and we face, therefore, another crisis in all of our cities and states. It's a grim picture.
Mind-boggling. It really is. Professor Richard Wolff, thanks so much for dropping by and talking with us.
My pleasure, Tom.
Much appreciated. democracyatwork.info. And check out Professor Wolff's books. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around. We'll be back with more of the news of the day. I have a bit of a rant for you and your calls. Stick around. And welcome back. Jeff in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind?
Hey, good morning, Tom. And, thank you and your staff for keeping us informed and prepared for these battles at hand. And, Tom, besides presenting their plans to address all the crises that Congresswoman Jayapal outlined and contrasting those plans versus Trump's catastrophic failures, I think part of Biden and Harris's closing argument should be using Trump's own words against him when he gave away the game, saying the more people vote, the more Republicans will never win. That should be a rallying cry on our side. And Tom, my question to you concerns vote counting. What do you think about Ralph Nader's idea of a quickly formed bipartisan movement that calls for a grace period of a week or two, allowing all the votes to be counted before declaring a winner?
I think it's a great idea. It's too late to do it now, and it's not something that the Republicans would ever support, legislatively. But I think it's a great idea. Jeff, thank you for the call. Wayne in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Wayne, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I've had a kind of a radical idea about what to do about the judges, and not just the Supreme Court, but the others. And I think the ideas you had of, number one, Congress having some control over the bills they pass in relation to the court, and also about adding new seats. But I've got another idea, and that's impeachment. Because if we play by Republican rules, we can have an impeachment hearing in 10 minutes with no, just an up or down vote. And we can do the same thing for their trial. And I think in about 2 weeks, we can clear out a whole bunch of judges that were, stolen from Obama.
I don't think so. Respectfully, Wayne, here's the problem. You have to, if you're going to impeach somebody, you have to charge them with a crime. You can't just impeach them because they were illegitimately put there or Mitch McConnell didn't play fair or whatever. You have to find actual wrongdoing at the worst. Arguably incompetence, but to the best of my knowledge, with one exception, There was one Supreme Court justice that they tried to impeach back in the early 1800s. My recollection is the 1810s, but I could be wrong. And they went after him basically because he was an alcoholic, and an ass. But they didn't succeed. I mean, he was impeached in the House, but not removed from office in the Senate. And so it's such a rare thing.
But high crimes and misdemeanors can mean anything that the House wants it to mean. And,
arguably, yeah.
And if the judges colluded with Trump or to steal the judges, or with McConnell to steal those judges from Obama, they colluded by accepting those positions. I call that a high crime.
Yeah, I know my sense of it is that number one, you're not. I'm with you, Wayne, that I want to do something about it, and I think that what we need to do is expand the court system and then insert some decent judges, some qualified judges instead of these political hacks that Trump has put in there. But getting Congress to go along with an impeachment of judges is going to be a real challenge. Wayne, thanks a lot for the call. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with my rant and your calls as we continue through our hour today. Stick around. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast, 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for the folks who support our program, and it's about exactly why rich people, I'm talking about people who make more than $1 million a year marginally, and over $3 million a year, that group totally, why this group of people who are multi-millionaires and are literally bringing into the house over $1 million a year and over $3 million a year, why would they want to destroy Obamacare? Turns out there's a very simple answer, and a very straightforward answer, and a rather shocking answer, that they would put all this time and effort, years of work, into trying to kill Obamacare and throw 20, 30, 40,000 million people, off their health care. And you can see it, hear it, read all about it, as it were, over at thomhartmann.com in our new members-only video. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It just came out yesterday, and many of us just heard the audio tapes for the first time this morning or last night, of Bob Woodward back in April. Now, just put this timeline in your head. You'll recall it was November that the U.S. government learned that there was a contagious disease running around in China and notified Israel and some of our other allies. It was December that we figured out pretty much what it was. It was January that the Chinese government publicly announced what was going on and published the genome of the virus, so that by the end of January, the World Health Organization had come up with a test for it, which they had distributed to over 60 countries. Trump said we wouldn't take it because that's going to those S-hole countries and we don't want it. We'll develop our own. We'll figure out some way for some Trump buddy to make a fortune on this. And then on March 11th, that was when Donald Trump declared a lockdown, basically, or kind of shut down the economy. And then something happened. And as I said, it was April 18th that Bob Woodward sat down with Jared Kushner and said, what's going on with this virus? And Jared Kushner said, we being the Trump administration, we have taken the power back from the doctors. That's not the verbatim quote, but words to that effect. We're running this show now, not the doctors. So what was happening right around April 18th? Well, as I mentioned, on March 11th, Trump had shut the country down. The economy had crashed. People were laid off. But, saving lives is the number one consideration. I mean, Trump was putting doctors on TV every day. He was holding these meetings. The media was freaking out. We were watching refrigerated trucks carrying bodies away from New York hospitals. Doctors and nurses were our new national heroes. And then came April 7th. On April 7th, the New York Times ran a front page story with the headline, "Black Americans Face Alarming Rates of Coronavirus Infection in Some States." And across the American media landscape, similar headlines were popping up in every newspaper. The Washington Post did a story like this, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, ABC, NBC, CBS, Evening News, all of them, everybody. April 7th, everybody led with this story. African Americans are disproportionately getting and dying from the coronavirus. And the white American conservative infrastructure sat up like Scooby-Doo and went, "Whoa? What the hell?" It was like, whoa. Rush Limbaugh went on the air and said, "With the coronavirus, I have been waiting for the racial component. The coronavirus now hits African Americans harder than illegal aliens, harder than women. It hits African Americans harder than anybody. Disproportionate representation." Well, it doesn't take a medical savant. You don't have to be a doctor to figure out that would be the case, because African Americans die at disproportionately higher rates from everything, from heart disease to strokes to cancer to childbirth in America. It's a symptom of a racially rigged economy and healthcare system that only responds to money, which America has conspired to keep from African Americans for more than 400 years. Of course they're going to die more frequently from the coronavirus. But the New York Times and the Washington Post, simultaneously publishing these front page stories, both on April 7th, echoed across the right-wing infrastructure, the media landscape, like a 4th of July fireworks display. Tucker Carlson went on the air. And he had been taking the virus seriously. He was about the only Fox primetime host who had. And he said, right after this report, "Well, we can begin to consider how to improve the lives of the rest, the countless Americans who've been grievously hurt by our response to this. How do we get 17 million of our most vulnerable citizens back to work? That's our task." White people were out of work, and black people were most of the casualties outside of the extremely elderly. And those white people needed their jobs back. Britt Hume went on Carlson's show as the news guy, and he said, "Well, the disease turns out not to be quite as dangerous as we thought." Right. Even Fox News viewers can hear dog whistles like that. More than 12,000 Americans had died from the coronavirus as of April 7th. But most of the non-elderly victims were black. And suddenly, everything was different. It took less than a week for Trump to get the memo. On April 12th, he retweeted a call for Dr. Anthony Fauci to be fired. And in another tweet said that he had the sole authority to open the United States back up and would roll out a plan to do that shortly. That was April 12th. Keep in mind, April 18th was when Bob Woodward recorded this conversation with Jared Kushner. On April 13th, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce published a policy paper titled Implementing a National Return to Work. On April 14th, FreedomWorks, the group that brought us the Tea Party, published an op-ed on their website calling for an economic recovery program and a new law to shield businesses from lawsuits. 3 days after that, FreedomWorks and the House Freedom Caucus issued a joint statement declaring it's time to reopen the economy. The FreedomWorks published their Reopen America Planning Guide, saying to show up in person at your state capitol and governor's mansion with your homemade signs. And this led to these rallies all over the country. Probably the one that got the most attention was the one in Michigan, where they were threatening Gretchen Whitmer. So that's what was going on April 18th. Let's put this in context.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I mean, the conservative meme from then till now is, hey, the risk to white people is small, so let's get back to work. Right.
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually.
In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then-Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media.
By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2-to-1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So we have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com for people who are supporters of our program. And it gets into the 2016 election and what lessons we can draw from that for the 2020 election. For example, in 2016, according to the exit polls, and all we have to look at right now are pre-polls, but the exit polls, these are the actual voters who are being asked. In 2016, in Florida, Hillary Clinton, according to the exit polls, beat Donald Trump 47.7 to 46.4. According to the exit polls in 2016 in North Carolina, Hillary Clinton beat Trump 48.6 to 46.5%. In Pennsylvania, according to the exit polls, Hillary Clinton beat Trump 50.5% to Trump's 46.1%. And in Wisconsin, she beat Trump 48.2% to 44.3%. And yet all 4 of those states gave their electoral votes, the official win, to Donald Trump. Why is that? I lay it all out. You can check it out over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Daniel in Detroit, Michigan. Hey, Daniel, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I was just watching Good Morning America 3, and the Secretary of State of Alabama was on there. The anchor asked him, why did the Supreme Court side with you on banning drive-through voting? And he said that, well, drive-through voting is illegal, so therefore, we want to side with anything that's illegal and stop it. But wouldn't that, kind of conflict with Americans with Disabilities Act and their right to vote? What's the legalities behind drive-through voting possibly being illegal? What's he getting at?
Yeah, he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. I mean, part of that lawsuit specifically had to do with the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it's just, what we're seeing here is that the courts have been so politicized by this 40-year effort by Leonard Leo and the billionaires who support him and funnel money to him, and the CP, the group that we were talking about yesterday, the Shadow Network that we were talking about yesterday with Ann Nelson. I mean, it has become so seriously politicized that we no longer have justices, at least on the Supreme Court, and at least particularly among the conservative justices, and we no longer have justices who are actually ruling on the merits of the law. They're ruling on what's best for which political party or what comports with whose political ideology. And, this is the result of, the Supreme Court itself kind of brought this on itself back in the early 70s, in 76 and 78, with the Buckley decision and the First National Bank decision, the Bellotti decision, where they said that, if billionaires want to own politicians or own the political process or even own an entire political party, that's just called free speech. And so the billionaires went from owning politicians to now owning judges. I mean, it was just predictable. And they own a good chunk of the Supreme Court as well. So, we've got a lot of work to do, Daniel. We've got a lot of fixing to do here, and hopefully we can get to it. Daniel, thank you for the call. It's a great question. Jesus in McAllen, Texas. Hey, Jesus, what's up?
Hey, greetings from deep South Texas.
Thank you.
Yes, I have a question. Basically, how have the Republicans and Mitch McConnell been able to appoint so many federal judges? What tactics have they used that perhaps Biden and the Democrats can use hopefully, if things go,
right. The strategy that they used was that during the last 4 years of the Obama presidency, McConnell slowed down the approval of federal judges through the court. Actually, throughout the entire 8 years of the Obama presidency, McConnell, to the extent that McConnell could, or I guess it would be the last 6 years that McConnell was running the Senate, because Schumer ran it up until the end of the second year of the Obama presidency, but 2010. But in that wave of 2010, the Republicans took the Senate back, and so by slow walking judges. And then during the last 2 years of the Obama presidency, absolutely obstructing all of them. As people were retiring from the federal bench or dying and, these seats were becoming available, McConnell wasn't filling them. It got so bad that about a year before the election of 2016, back in 2015, maybe even late 2014, John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, wrote an open letter to the Senate basically saying, we have a crisis across the federal courts because we have too few judges. And you got to start approving judges. McConnell was like, nope, we're not going to do it. And so when Trump came into office, the day that he came into office, there were, I believe, almost 200 federal judgeships open, certainly more than 100. And that were just sitting there waiting because, Obama had nominated people. For example, Obama had nominated for the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. Obama had nominated an extraordinarily qualified black woman to be a justice on that court. I'm sorry, I don't recall her name right off the top of my head, but McConnell not only refused to hold a hearing on that judge, but he held that seat open so that Trump could put Amy Coney Barrett in that seat, who up to that point had just been a lawyer and a professor, of right-wing law, and had never tried a case. I mean, Amy Coney Barrett has literally never tried a case as a lawyer. And she's only been a judge for 3 years because McConnell, stole that seat from an Obama appointee and gave it to her. So, I mean, this is how they've been doing it, in a big way, Jesus. And it's a testimonial, I suppose, to Mitch McConnell's patience and persistence and tenacity. And I think the Democrats need to learn the lesson from that and get some spine of their own, and hopefully they can do that. Thanks a lot for the call, Jesus. Justin in Summit Hill, Pennsylvania. Hey, Justin, what's on your mind?
That sort of aspect.
Justin?
If we're going to run into people who are going to be sorry about that. If all the people who are committing crimes like Bill Burr, like William Burr, Betsy DeVos, and all the cabinet members, are they going to face charges once Biden wins and that sort of stuff? Because, I mean, if they don't get charged with something, this could easily happen again, more than once.
Yeah, this is probably going to be one of the hardest decisions that a Biden administration, assuming there is one, knock wood, God willing, and all that kind of stuff. One of the hardest decisions they're going to have, because one of the hallmarks, excuse me, one of the characteristics that we've seen of banana republics, of strongman dictatorships, of governments that you couldn't even marginally call a small d democratic, is that they go after the person who preceded them when they get power. We saw this with Bolsonaro going after Lula in the previous president or prime minister in Brazil. And we see this in the countries that are run by hacks all over the world. And so on the one hand, and this I think is why Bill Clinton decided that he wasn't going to go after Jerry Ford or Richard Nixon, and why Barack Obama decided that he wasn't going to go after Dick Cheney and George W. Bush, even though in both cases, Richard Nixon and George W. Bush and Dick Cheney all committed major crimes that could easily have been prosecuted, lying us into wars. Go ahead.
Here's the thing now. I'm not talking about going after Trump. I'm talking about going after DeVos, Bill Barr, and
I'm with you,
who have committed these crimes and that sort of stuff, because that's what should happen. Because if that doesn't happen, we're going to have a major backlash in 2022. Oh, you didn't charge these people, you're going to let people get away with it again, and that sort of thing. It's going to happen. Yeah. No doubt about it.
I'm with you. It's going to have to be done through a process that is viewed by Americans as legitimate and proper. I mean, let's keep in mind, John Mitchell, who was the Attorney General for Richard Nixon, went to prison, as did, a number of other members of the Nixon administration. A number of members of the Reagan administration went to prison or were convicted of crimes. And later pardoned. Ollie North, for example, was convicted of a crime. He was pardoned by George Herbert Walker Bush a few years later in December. On December 24th, 1992, in fact, specifically, was when Ollie North was pardoned. But the bottom line is that those prosecutions were viewed as legitimate processes. So it can't be coming out of the White House. It has to be coming out of prosecutors' offices, legitimate prosecutors' offices going after these guys. And we'll see. We'll see. I am hopeful. I'm hopeful, Justin, but, time will tell. Thanks a lot for the call. John and Eugene. Hey, John, we just have a minute at the break. You got a quick one?
Yeah, I do, Tom. I just wanted to point out to you, talking about judges and all the empty seats when Trump rolled into town. Keep in mind that Pat Leahy, as the judicial chairman, when the Dems held that committee, when they held a majority in the Senate, honored the blue slip procedure, which allowed Republican senators to veto nominations in their home states, which was outrageous.
You're right. And this is something that goes back to before the Civil War. And for people who don't know what we're talking about, if the president had nominated a federal judge from Oregon, for example, and either of our two senators, Wyden or Merkley, were to say, no, I object to that judge, that would be it. That judge would not be considered. And
Tom, sorry to interrupt, but Feinstein is proposing the same blue slip procedure now if she heads the committee. So something for people to call their senators about.
There you go. I'm with you, John. John, thank you. Thank you very much. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The blue slip process, by the way, goes back to allowing Southern senators to, basically continue promoting segregation and things like that. And welcome back. Lisa in Pebble Beach, California. Hey, Lisa, thanks for watching us on Facebook Live. What's up?
Hi. Didn't Amy Coney Barrett commit perjury when she denied knowing that the ADF had training programs to criminalize homosexuality and to promote the sterilization of trans people around the world? That was in 2017, that seat that you were talking about that Mitch McConnell gave her. She lied about knowing anything about that then. Al Franken questioned her, and he informed her that she trained people in that program. She lied right to his face.
What was the ADF?
The Alliance to Defend Freedom, which is this religious rights thing that's in cahoots with the ALEC people and all these evangelical lunatics. And anyway, that seat McConnell stole for her. What's his name? Then Senator Al Franken interviewed her, and he pointed this whole thing out to her, that the Southern Poverty Law Center was, had this ADF, that she trained people with this organization. She trained them in these techniques, this philosophy, whatever, ideology. And then again last week, Senator Leahy questioned her again about this, her involvement with the ADF, and she denied knowing anything about this. 2 times she committed perjury, once in the lower court and once in this particular. And how come nobody knows? The video's out there. Al Franken put it out. You know who the lawyer Glenn Kirshner is? He does a lot of these podcasts and videos on YouTube. Why we need to impeach? I agree with the fellow and we can start the procedures if the Judiciary Committee and our Senate representatives who interviewed her go and look. It's not even a 60-minute video. It points it out. I mean, a child could look at this, an elementary school kid, and say, "Oh, she just lied, not only once but twice, 2017 and last week. She perjured herself." Is perjury not a crime? I mean, first of all,
it is. It is. And you got Brett Kavanaugh on that, too, by the way.
Right. We use euphemisms when we say shenanigans, when we say misconduct. These are crimes against democracy. And we need to start using the same language that the right uses when they're coming after us all the time for nothing. These people are evil to the core. I'm sorry.
It's going to take... I'm with you, Lisa, and I would love to see Amy Coney Barrett impeached for lying to Congress if we can demonstrate that she did. The advantage that the right has over the left and things like this is that they've got this giant media echo chamber where they can say something on the Daily Caller and write something on the Daily Caller. It gets repeated on Fox News, then it gets repeated on right-wing talk radio, then it gets repeated by Senator Ron Johnson, and then it gets and then it gets in the Record, and then it gets picked up by the New York Times, and there's nothing like that on the left. There's no parallel to that on the left. And that's what it would take. It would take a massive, basically, PR campaign to make that happen. And it's tragically, and this is the consequence of progressives failing to realize. Lisa, thank you for your call. To realize the importance of media. I mean, I've been doing this show for 17 years. We have met with a bunch of members of Congress over the years, and a bunch of the Democratic donors and things. And it's like everybody's like, oh, media, media's no big deal. We don't have to worry about media. We just need to win elections. Well, that's how you win elections. We'll be back. The hidden history of the Supreme Court tells the story of Nixon and Reagan's committing treason to steal the White House. Hey, we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for folks who support our program. It's about a growing movement, oddly enough, on the hard right, on the far fringe extreme right, that says that because Congress, after the Civil War, had not seated senators and members of the House from the former Confederate states and refused to until they changed their state constitutions to eliminate slavery, because they did not have a say in the writing and the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that ended slavery, gave equal protection under the law to everybody, and guaranteed the right to vote to formerly enslaved people, that because the Confederate States were not represented, these are illegitimate amendments. And oddly, one of the people who's at the forefront of this is Amy Coney Barrett. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. Oh, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here, Nancy in Springfield. Hey, Nancy, what's up?
Well, you keep talking about having the right to vote, and that is well and good. But then we also, on top of that, need to have the right to have our vote counted, because people who did the provisional ballots that were thrown out, thought they voted and had, thought their vote was counted, but it wasn't. I guess in Pennsylvania, you have to use the secrecy envelope to have your vote counted, which I know here in Oregon. Which is
optional here, yeah.
It's optional. It says right on the envelope that it's optional, but so I think we need to have some way to have our the right to vote counted. And I know I read, okay, so what if I mess up on my vote? So I went and read online that here in Oregon, if there's a problem with your vote, they send you a letter, and you have 14 days to get back to them, to fix it. And I was just thinking, my brother broke his arm in August, and if he'd broken it, like right before our votes came, he wouldn't have been able to sign his his envelope.
Yeah, did you see, Nancy, that in Miami-Dade County, 23% of mail-in ballots are being rejected because people didn't sign the outside of the envelope? This is something that's pretty universal. I believe it's in every state that you have to sign the outside of the envelope, because that's how they confirm your signature. That's the equivalent of showing ID. That's your proof that you're you. And I remember when we moved to Oregon back when Louise and I first moved here, 15 years ago, and I voted by mail, and I remember not wanting to sign the back of that envelope. I mean, do I want my signature going through the mail? It seems awful public to me, but I signed it because it said you have to sign it. But I thought, why? Now I understand exactly why. I mean, that's it's the equivalent of signing and registering, when you go to vote. But a right to have your vote counted, and Nancy, thank you for the call. A right to have your vote counted would be implicit in a right to vote. Obviously, having the right to cast your vote is part of a right to vote, but having your vote counted as well. So that's why I think that we need, at the very least, a law that explicitly says that, although I think the Motor Voter Act does. But even better would be an explicit constitutional amendment that says that we have a right to vote and it shall not be taken away from us. Gilbert in San Antonio, Texas. Hey, Gilbert, what's up?
How you doing, Tom? I missed you last time. I tried to call in and I got cut off, but I listen to your program all the time, and thank you for taking my call. And I think it's a very good program. I'm down here in San Antonio, Texas, and I just want to say that I think that Joe Biden, I voted for him even before South Carolina down here. We had our primary things, and I knew he was going to win. But if he doesn't add to the Supreme Court, well, he can't do it himself. I know it has to be Congress, but he has to sign it. I think he'll be a one-term president because people are really angry about what's going on with that Supreme Court stuff. And I think that he is really important that he doesn't overlook that, because it could really cost him and Harris another election, even if they get this one.
Yeah. I agree with you, Gilbert, and I think the not just the Supreme Court needs to be expanded, but we need to expand the entire federal judiciary and get a bunch of new judges in there. That's what we need to be doing. You and I, we need to be contacting our elected representatives after the election. The big work begins after the election. Everybody thinks, oh, voting, that's the big work. No, voting obviously is a civic responsibility. It's part of it. But, we've got to get to work after the election. Gilbert, thank you. Excellent point. Donnie in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Hey, Donnie, what's up?
Hey, sir. How you doing? Appreciate you taking the call. I have a question for you. Is there any room for the Democrats, progressives, left of center, to try and politically divide and conquer the religious right? Because after your great interview with Ann Nelson from yesterday, it's clear to me that right-wing Catholics are the ones that control the Republican Party. And I think if the normal, everyday, conservative evangelicals realize that, they would probably have a problem with that. They're the ones that give them the donations. And when you think about Republicans, I think evangelical. But it seems like to me, Catholics are the ones controlling the stuff. So you think it's a way to get in there and divide them, maybe?
We'll see, Donnie. I'd be wary of trying to provoke a religious war, basically, between factions, Christian factions. But that said, the Republicans have been running this scam since the mid-'70s, which is elect us and we'll reverse Roe v. Wade. And so, every year they get more evangelicals and more Catholics and more money and, big organizations and rallies and meetings in D.C. And they never overturned Roe v. Wade. Well, now they may do it. And if the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, in the next few months, and there's a very good chance they will do that, then what are the Republicans going to do? They will have accomplished that. They will have made abortion illegal. The issue is gone. And so what is the religious right going to do to get votes and to get money? I don't know. It's like, they'll try to go after homosexuality. That just doesn't fly anymore. And I think that they're going to be without issues. So my guess is that they're going to lose their power as a result of accomplishing what they said they wanted to accomplish for the last 40 years or 50 years. But time will tell. We'll see. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code Tom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM.
Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carignan Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles in their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty 2 stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCatherine gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCatherine saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and 3-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
In science news, Greenpeace has published a rather extraordinary new report about the consequences of TEPCO, the Japanese company that owns the Fukushima reactors, dumping millions of gallons of highly radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean. It's pretty startling stuff. And Shaun Burnie, a senior nuclear specialist with Greenpeace Germany, is on the line with us. Greenpeace.org, of course, the website. Shaun Burnie, ShaunBurnie, is the Twitter handle for Shaun. Shaun, welcome to the program. Tell us about this.
Thank you, Tom. Greenpeace has been concerned, obviously, about Fukushima for many years. We're nearly 10 years after the start of the nuclear accident with the 3 reactors melting down in 2011. One of the major issues over the years has been the buildup of contaminated water. This is water that has been used by TEPCO to attempt to cool the molten fuel in the reactors or underneath the reactors. But it's also the freshwater, groundwater, that has been coming onto the site over the many decades that the Fukushima reactors have been there. But of course, since 2011, there's also been a nuclear disaster. So highly contaminated that water has become. And TEPCO have been storing that water, building up in tanks at the site. And as of the end of last month, around 1,000 tanks with over 1.23 million cubic meters or tons of highly contaminated water in those tanks. And over the last years, the Japanese government, TEPCO, the authorities have been assessing what they consider the best option for managing or dealing with that water. And it's been very clear for the last 3 or 4 years that their preferred option was to discharge it or dump it in the Pacific Ocean. And that's
the point where we are now. The Japanese government, it says, is soon to make a decision to discharge that water into the Pacific.
So tell me about carbon-14. On Star Trek, they refer to us as carbon-based life forms. We humans, we've got a lot of carbon in our bodies.
Yeah.
What is carbon-14? Why should we worry about it? How long does it persist in the environment? And in that context, can you also explain what bioaccumulation is?
So in the tank water, over 1 million tons, there's a whole mixture, a toxic brew of radionuclides that were in the molten fuel and have come into the water. Carbon-14 is one of about 64 actual radionuclides or radioisotopes that were measured by TEPCO in the early phases of storing this water. With carbon-14, the problem that you have is it has a half-life. That's the length of time that half the radiation will decay, of 5,370 years. Generally, you consider a radioactive isotope hazardous for about 10 half-lives. So in this case, it's over 50,000 years that carbon-14 will be in the environment, posing a hazard. The problem is with carbon-14, as the name suggests, is it's carbon, and it enters all life forms, which can be, of course, plants, animals, sea life, and also humans. And because it's around for so long, effectively becomes accumulated in everything. And of course, there's natural carbon-14, which is due to, in large part, to cosmic radiation, enormous amounts of that in the atmosphere, which end up in the oceans, but also in the atmosphere. This is a radioactive source that doesn't need to be discharged. It can be stored in the tanks, and that's what we've been saying.
So they could filter it out of the water?
You asked about bioaccumulation. So the bioaccumulation, because there's so many different types of radionuclides, each one behaves differently in the environment. Now, I suppose one thing you would say on the positive level, if you can say anything positive, is any discharges will go into the Pacific Ocean. That's an enormous body of water, the world's largest body of water, with very powerful currents. The problem is radioactive material, it accumulates, it disperses, it dilutes, and then it can also reaccumulate. So different radionuclides have different so-called concentration factors. That's the amount that accumulates, bioaccumulates in marine life, in seaweed, in fish, in crustaceans, and ultimately in humans if they happen to ingest whatever that is that's concentrated. And with carbon-14, you have a very high concentration factor, maybe 5,000, 10,000. Some indications are maybe 50,000 higher than, for example, radioactive tritium, which is a gas and liquid that would be discharged also if the plans go ahead.
My recollection is that the body can't distinguish between strontium and calcium. And so radioactive strontium, which is heavily represented in this kind of waste, gets the body absorbs it, it goes into our bones, and eventually produces bone cancer. That the body can't distinguish between radioactive cesium and potassium, and so the body thinks that cesium is potassium and puts it into our muscles and can cause cancer that way. Am I remembering those two things right? And obviously carbon, another thing that, our body's made of carbon. We would just simply start accumulating the carbon. And of course fish and, anything in the oceans would be accumulating this stuff. And then if we eat that, we would be getting it. Are there, number one, do I have those two right? And number two, what are the other elements that are highly interactive with organisms, with us, with living organisms, as opposed to things that might be a little harder for us to absorb?
Generally, you're right. The so-called biological half-life, that refers to the amount of time that the radionuclides that are taken into the body, and if we're talking about ingested, how much time that radionuclide remains in the body. And in the case of cesium, actually, cesium can actually have a relatively short half-life for most of the cesium that you are absorbing, but there's a potential for a small fraction of that to last longer in the body. And each radionuclide behaves differently, and you mentioned strontium-90. Strontium-90 is one of the most hazardous radionuclides. It's one of the reasons there is a
ban on nuclear testing, particularly from the atmospheric nuclear testing of the 1960s, because there was so much strontium-90 being released into the atmosphere. So it's a bone seeker. And there's an enormous amount of strontium-90 in the contaminated water. Tokyo Electric, for years, claimed that the...
Shaun? I think we might have just lost Shaun's audio. Let me look at the phone line.
I'm still here. I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you dropped out for a second. Just continue. You were saying you were talking about strontium-90.
Yeah. So this is one of the most hazardous radionuclides, but Tokyo Electric, the Japanese government, have not wanted to talk about it for years. The reason they didn't want to talk about it was that the technology that they deployed, it's a system of removing radioactivity that they pump through pipes, so-called ALPS system. It's an ion exchange system that removes radioactivity. Now, for years, they claimed that that was working very well and that they were reducing the concentrations of radioactivity in the water. In around 2018, my late missed colleague, Dr. John Large, and I, we were contacted and given some access to some information from TEPCO, and John looked at the data, and he was suspicious about the levels that the TEPCO were saying was in the water. About a month later, it was disclosed by investigators in Tokyo that the ALPS system had actually stopped functioning to the level that TEPCO had said.
Oh, geez. Amazing. Shaun, I'm sorry, we have a hard break here at 15 after. I can't control it, but it's fascinating talking with you. Okay. Shaun Burnie with Greenpeace Germany.
Okay.
Really appreciate it. Thanks so much for dropping by.
You're welcome.
Great speaking with you. We'll be right back. Greenpeace.org, your website.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Is it possible healthcare can be a climate solution? I'll tell you about that after the break, and a little more of the news of the day. We'll pick up your phone calls as well. Stick around. And welcome back. Cassandra in Camas, Washington. Hey, Cassandra, thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. What's up?
Thank you. Hope you're having a good day. So let's see. I basically wanted to talk a little bit about what you were saying earlier, and I know you've said this on several occasions about the media and the fact that, a lot of deregulations have happened around it concerning no longer having to present both sides of an issue. But I want to basically say that there's got to be something, and I want your opinion on this, some way that we can, through our representatives or something, obviously after we get Trump out, try to remedy this so that we equate the multi-headed monster that the media has now become, an unregulated, childish monster, to the dangers of smoking cigarettes, profanity on radio, not being able to yell fire in a crowded theater. These are all things that we no longer allow. You can't put a cigarette out on TV. Why? Because it's been proven to be, unhealthy for your health. It's unhealthy for our bodies. You can no longer yell profanity on a radio. Well, you never could, but you can't say certain words. Why? Because it is considered, inappropriate and so forth, and obviously younger listeners and so on. And yelling fire in a theater, unless there's an actual fire, flames licking up the back, you could cause a stampede and hurt people, crush people, what have you. These are all things that we recognize as being dangerous to our society for various reasons. We need to somehow equate the unregulated media's ability, especially during elections, to do the same thing. They should at least have to do the very minimal of providing, the both sides of an issue or candidates for an office, so that we don't end up with this, because this has become a fundamental way of people becoming educated in this country, which is sad. But it is. And, I have, not that it matters to this discussion, but I have a degree in history. And when you go to college, the first thing you will learn is that you have to have multiple sources on any given topic, whether you're researching science, history, anything. This needs to be made clear that this is a requirement in order to get real information. And we're counting on our media nowadays to give us this
Cassandra,
information.
Forgive the interruption, but we have a little less than a minute left. The problem is if at the level of government we decide that we're going to make sure that the media is telling the truth, what happens when that government gets taken over by somebody like Donald Trump and they have their own opinion about what the truth is?
Right. Well, that's why I said multiple perspectives have to be represented.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why I think that needs to be out there. Because how do you fix a problem if it's only one piece of information and you can't see that there are other sides to it? How do you start fixing any problem?
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's a real challenge. And I think that, a lot of damage was done by Reagan repealing the Fairness Doctrine in '87. A lot of damage was done by Clinton signing the Telecommunications Act of '96. And these are things that we need to take on. And breaking up, huge media would be at the top of my list. But it's not going to be easy. It's definitely not going to be easy. Cassandra, thank you for raising an important issue. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So back in 2016, the election year, Donald Trump was not yet president. He was just running a scam university, Trump University. That year, and Barack Obama was president, that year, Corinthian Colleges and ITT Technical Institute, two scam for-profit colleges, went out of business and ended up leaving thousands, maybe tens of thousands of students just basically screwed. No degree, no job, and massive amounts of student debt. So President Obama and the Secretary of Education put together this plan. It's called the Borrower Defense Rule that said that if somebody got ripped off by one of these for-profit colleges, they didn't have to pay back the debt. If it was student debt that was issued by the federal government, we would just eat it as a country. They were the victims of fraud. Well, it turns out Betsy DeVos had other ideas. She came into office, of course, just months afterwards as Donald Trump was sworn into office, and she's been fighting it all the way. You can check the whole thing out over at ThomHartmann.com and our new video for supporters of our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And I wanted to share this extraordinary story. We tend not to think that economies and healthcare and the environment are interlinked or interlocked. But in fact, they are. They all influence each other. And this remarkable study that was just published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, it's some work that was done by the University of California at Santa Barbara's Dr. Andy McDonald, found that when they went into rural Indonesia, Indonesia is a country that has, still a fair amount of rainforest and or of jungle, and these exotic trees that command quite a high price on the international markets, but are protected. I'm not sure if these are the specific species, but things like teak and mahogany, woods that, 40, 50 years ago you would commonly find in high-end furniture and things. You just can't even find them anymore because they're, what they found was that people in these rural communities in Indonesia were going out into the forest or into the jungle and cutting down these protected trees and selling them into the black market, into the smuggler's market, in order to pay for health care. Right? You can't live if if you're sick and you don't have access to health care. Health care has become a core part of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as much as shelter and food and and to some extent transportation. And so what they did was they went into these rural areas and they opened free or super cheap health clinics in these areas to serve the people. Now, this was not with any idea about what the impact it might have on the environment. This was a purely, health-based, altruistic effort to bring health care to people who didn't have access to it or only had spotty access to it. So they opened up these clinics, and what they found after a 10-year period that these health clinics had been running in these rural areas of Indonesia was that the logging, the deforestation, the illegal logging, these are national parks, protected areas, that people were going in and poaching trees, essentially, that the logging decreased by 70%. That equates, so this study says, that equates to more than $65 million worth of avoided carbon emissions, which is the climate, and of course, the not losing protected and endangered species as well. All because they brought health care to these folks. I think it's just remarkable, and it's worth noting. It's worth sharing with people and telling your friends about. Another story that I thought was fascinating, we've all heard of Al-Qaeda, right? I mean, this was the organization that Osama bin Laden had, I don't know if he founded it, but he had become a major bigwig player in it, and that organized and planned the 9/11 attacks in the United States. Most Americans don't know what Al-Qaeda means. It's Arabic. And El means the, but what does Qaeda mean? Turns out it means the base. Al-Qaeda, translated into English, is the base. So with that little bit of knowledge in your head, let me just share with you this bit of a story by Robert Snell and Beth LeBlanc in today's Detroit News. It's today's newspaper. Federal agents on Thursday, today, arrested two men, including the self-proclaimed leader of The Base, a violent white supremacist group, as part of a continuing crackdown on extremism in Michigan 3 weeks after the FBI said it thwarted a plot to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer. A team of FBI agents arrested Justin Watkins, 25, of Bad Axe, Michigan, the self-proclaimed leader of The Base, and Alfred Gorman, 35, of Taylor, during a pair of raids. They're linked to a December 2019 incident in Dexter, Michigan, in which a local family was terrified by the men who tried to intimidate a husband and wife and shared their address with members of The Base, according to Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel. The Base. Honest to God. I mean, you look at these Al-Qaeda guys, now it's ISIS guys, right, who are doing it, driving around in their pickup trucks and half-tracks and Humvees with their giant Al-Qaeda or ISIS flags, and their guns, their semi-automatic weapons. The Arabic version or the Middle Eastern version of the Small Penis Gun Club. And then you look at, these guys in the United States who are now openly calling themselves Al-Qaeda. And, driving around in their pickup trucks with the giant flags and their AR-15s and terrorizing people. And I'm wondering what's the difference. Right-wing religious fanatics all. I mean, it's I guess the difference is that here in the United States, members of Al-Qaeda or the base say that they're doing it in the name of Christianity. We have to dominate these women and terrify these people. Whereas, in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan, it's in the name of Islam or Allah. They're both, on both sides, in both cases. They're heretics, in my opinion. We'll be back with your calls right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
That just blows my mind that one of these, right-wing nut job groups who call themselves that. It just blows my mind.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan. This is from Chapter 1, The Power of Data. In November 2017, my Apple MacBook Pro was stolen. It happened on the island of Ibiza, where I was visiting my friend, a documentary filmmaker.
We were thinking of making a series of short films to illustrate innovative uses of new technology around the world. We sat together writing down examples of technological innovation, subversion, and creativity we'd already witnessed. We discussed themes I explore in this book, such as surveillance, the gig economy, and the future of work, artificial intelligence, and cryptocurrencies. After uploading our ideas to Google's cloud-based storage platform, Google Drive, we took a short break, locking our laptops in the trunk of our rented car. When we returned, both laptops were gone. Although upset, I was also relieved. I'd be able to recover most of my data because almost all of it was in the cloud. That was what I signed on to when I stored my files with Google as well as with Apple, Microsoft, and Dropbox. But in the bargain, I'd allowed them to profit from my data. It dawned on me, given the terms of service I'd agreed to, that the value of the data of my data to the storage companies was far greater than the value of my laptop to the thief. How many of us are fully aware that companies providing us with cloud storage have ways to monetize our data? They use targeted advertising, for instance, and charge fees once we get hooked on the security and peace of mind that their free services offer. We put faith in these companies to store our files securely, but our private information may no longer remain private if, let's say, the government asks to search through our data. It's also not private because all this data is surveilled, computed, and often manipulated in mysterious ways to influence and shape our behaviors as these corporations see fit. By creating accounts with these companies, we give them access to ourselves. So when we consent to privacy policies, in reality, we're signing on to systems of surveillance never before seen in human history, and we do so without being included or consulted. By desiring to keep our data accessible and recoverable, we lock ourselves into using their services. As I thought about getting my files back in Ibiza, I wondered, does access to my own property have to come with such strings attached? In my relationship to Apple, I find the strings impossible to untie. By purchasing an Apple laptop, I had unwittingly transformed from a customer into a part of the company's product line. I had provided Apple with private data and trusted Apple to protect it. Now, to retrieve that data, I had to purchase a new laptop with Apple-owned peripherals and devices. So I caught the next flight to Madrid. I then took the train to the city's Apple store located in Puerto del Sol. In many ways, this central plaza still serves in its centuries-old role as a landmark and gathering place for the entire Spanish nation, a point from which numerous roads emanate. With its distinctive aesthetic and its strategic placement in a civic space, the Apple Store stood out among the adjacent parliamentary and government buildings as if the global brand were more powerful than Spain itself. The day I was there, more people entered and left the Apple Store than passed through the doors of my neighboring building. In 2017, Apple, a private corporation worth more than $1 trillion, actually began to conceptualize its retail stores as town squares, thereby branding itself an integral part of our everyday lives. Other big technology corporations describe themselves in similar terms. Facebook CEO and founder Mark Zuckerberg, for instance, refers to the company as a social infrastructure for the global community. So what we have in the digital world are privately owned public spheres. They're branded as public, civic, and virtuous, but in reality are dominated by a single logic, extending profitability and economic value. How can these companies' interests be the same as the public interest? Like many other large corporations, Apple is shareholder-owned and therefore primarily accountable to its investors and executives, rather than to its employees, customers, or the general public. I had not begun to unpack the meaning of all this until I realized how monumental the Puerto del Sol Apple Store actually was, as an icon and a structure. As I walked into the store, an Apple employee invited me to purchase a new machine, log onto my iCloud account, and retrieve from Apple Cloud Storage the data that I lost from my stolen laptop. These transactions, completed in less than an hour, were simple and efficient. My data was extraterritorial, easily retrievable in Spain, and likely would be in most other countries. Purchasing a new laptop and getting my data back supported Apple's economic model. National borders were no threat or hindrance. The same was true with retrieving data I had stored on other corporate cloud servers managed by Google and Dropbox. In technology circles, this saying has made the rounds. If you're not the customer, then you're the product. Many of today's technologies come to us for free, but in return, our personal lives come for free to these technologies. But they are accessible for the company's profit and gain. Yes, when we search Google, we look for information, but do we realize that Google is also searching us? Users, and it goes on from there. So the book is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan. Daily rants and weekly op-eds at HartmannReport.com. It's free and there's no ads. HartmannReport.com. So Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, is tweeting about how it took 8 days for a member of her family to get a COVID test back. And during that time, that person, who it turns out was positive, they didn't know for 8 days, that person infected 3 other people in their family. Had they simply known, they could have quarantined that person. Even Mick Mulvaney, right-wing crazy, former Tea Party congressman, acolyte of the Koch brother. Even Mick Mulvaney is saying this is unacceptable during a pandemic when his own kids couldn't get tested, or one of his kids. The other one got tested and it took 7 days to get the results back. He says this is unacceptable. We've got a whole video about why this is, where the ideology that's driving. This is beyond incompetence. This is actually ideological. A new video out about this for the supporters of our program. You can find it over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Robert in the Villages, Florida. Hey, Robert, is that that giant retirement community?
Yes, the most recently got visited by a certain bum from Washington. I won't mention his name.
Okay. Yeah, so what's on your mind?
Tom, I didn't know about you until about a week ago, and I was like, as I trolled, so I started seeing you, started listening to your program, and I enjoy it very much.
Thank you.
I'm one of those that's got the vote in, and we already did our mail-in, and it scares me. Number one, we can't go 4 more years with this bum. This country will not survive it. And I guess my biggest peeve is your thoughts on it. He's broken so many laws, and he's found so many ways to violate the Constitution, whether it's the Hatch Act, or just buying. Right now he's pitching people to go to the polls and cause trouble. Is that not treason?
Well, it depends on how you define treason. I mean, the classic definition of treason is giving aid and comfort to an enemy during time of conflict or war. But I think it's a crime against democracy. I think it qualifies as a high crime or misdemeanor. I think it's impeachable, frankly. I think his ginning up, white racists who call themselves Al-Qaeda. I mean, it's like, what? And so, yeah, I'm with you, Robert. I think it's offensive, and having people walk around with guns, intentionally to intimidate people or to make up for having small penises is just wrong. It's something that should not be allowed. So, Robert, spot on, and thank you. I'm glad you discovered the show, and I look forward to talking to you again. Thanks for the call, Richard in Ocean Park, Washington. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to throw up a case for impeachment starting November 4th. The Republicans are very creative in using every means necessary and out-of-the-box thinking to really kind of punish Democrats and the rest of the country. But we have an opportunity with impeachment to make a case for or make a methodology for holding people accountable. And the reason is the only exception to the pardon power in the Constitution is in cases of impeachment. So if we bring up a case of impeachment, naming various people that we want to hold accountable, such as Barr, Pompeo, etc., that would give standing in a court to keep to nullify impeachment, or not impeachment, pardons, including self-pardoning.
Yeah, I absolutely get what you're saying, Richard. And in fact, I've raised this with constitutional scholars a couple of times on this program over the last year or so, which is, if we wanted to prevent Trump from pardoning people, could we re-impeach Trump? Would that, trigger that part of the impeachment clause that says, except during impeachment? Or if Trump is trying to pardon Barr, should we be trying to impeach Barr? And the response that I've gotten over and over again is nobody knows the answer to that question because it's never been submitted to the Supreme Court. And because in the way that our system of government has been kind of redrawn over the years, the Supreme Court has the final say on what is and what is not, the meaning of the Constitution, and we're talking about something that's in the Constitution. So it would have to go to the Supreme Court. But I don't disagree that I think it would be a really good idea for the Democrats, for the Judiciary Committee in the House, to, as soon as possible, and presumably, Congress really won't be back until, I believe, after Thanksgiving. I think that there's a period between Thanksgiving and Christmas when they're back. But they can do anything on an emergency basis. To seriously consider re-impeaching Donald Trump and impeaching some of the people that Donald Trump might pardon, which is a double whammy, right? Because I don't know if when it says except during times of impeachment, does that mean, impeaching the president, or does that mean impeaching somebody that the president is, wants to pardon? And,
I think all the committees should be doing that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think they will because, they believe it'll be perceived as being partisan, and right out of the gate, they want to try and get stuff done rather than stir people up. That's the conventional thinking among the kind of so-called centrist Democrats, like the New Democrat Coalition, which is kind of the old Bill Clinton Democrats. I disagree with it. I think that I think you go with your base. I think that you do what you think is right, regardless of what the other side says. And I think the Democrats have to stop being all freaked out and hysterical every time Republicans snarl at them and go at them face on. But I'm not holding my breath. But I'm with you, Richard. Richard, thank you for the call. Alejandro in Miami, Florida. Hey, Alejandro, what's up?
Hello, Thom Hartmann. I just wanted to let you know that I heard your story today about the 22% of Miami-Dade ballots weren't counted by the city because they didn't sign the envelope, and that's very true. I mean, mine was counted last week. I sent it in 2 Saturdays ago, and it was counted last week Wednesday. At least by Thursday, I saw it was counted, and I definitely had to sign it in the back. Great. And I do share your concern about the whole public information thing, because on the envelope, in order to contact you, they told you, so you write your contact information, your name, your phone number, like your cell phone or home number, and an email address. And, of course, I was reluctant to do that only because anyone could see that information and, of course, my privacy concerns. But, of course, then I'm worried about if I don't put it, then they're not going to contact me back. So, obviously that's something to, consider.
Yeah. And Alejandro, let's, we all need to take a chill pill here. That's an old expression from the 80s. Sorry about that. But anyway, we all need to, relax a little about this. I mean, the fact, and as I said, I was nervous about signing my envelope the first time I did it. But you have to do that. But, then I thought, now I'm looking at this and thinking the only people who are going to see that, my signature or my email address or my, actually here in Oregon, they print your address on the outside in addition to your signature so that they can look it up, see who you are, make sure that you're registered to vote. Your phone number's not there, your email address, but, your address is there. But who's going to see that? It's going to be my mail carrier, who already knows my address and knows who I am and knows a lot more intimate details than that because they know everything I get in the mail. And whoever receives it on the other end, who's counting the votes, the state Secretary of State people, and they don't care. They've already got that information too. And in between, it's going through sorting machines and stuff. And I don't think anybody's going to pull it out and write it down or anything like that. So I'm really not worried about that. But I get what you're saying. And I think the important message is, and obviously it's too late to mail and Alejandro, thank you for the call. It's too late to mail anything in right now. So you've got to deliver it in person. But in most states, even when you deliver it in person, if you're taking an absentee ballot, you have to sign the outside of the envelope. So don't forget. Will in Ely, Minnesota. Hey, Will, what's up?
Hi, Tom. It's Ely, by the way.
Ely, thank you.
Yeah. I know this issue has been addressed before, but I've never heard it carried to the ultimate question. Trump has never committed to graciously leaving the White House or even ungraciously leaving it. He's never committed to accepting the results of the election. My question is, what happens if the day comes when Biden is unquestionably declared the winner and Trump still declines to accept it and refuses to leave the White House? What steps will be taken to correct that situation?
Well, at noon on January 20th, his nuclear codes will become inactive. his access to people and information will stop. I would be surprised if he has to be physically removed. I think a much more likely scenario, Will, is that he's going to refuse to acknowledge the defeat. And there's precedent for that. Stacey Abrams has never acknowledged being defeated in Georgia because she believes, and I think rightly so, that Brian Kemp stole the election. He was Secretary of State and refused to put people on the voting rolls and purge people from the voting rolls. So, I think Trump will probably say, I'm not going to acknowledge this. I'm not going to concede. I'm not going to give a concession speech. And I don't think he's going to show up for the inauguration of Joe Biden. I'm also thinking that there's probably a fairly high possibility that he's just going to say, okay, that's it, and leave the White House, in November or maybe December, and just, move back to New York City or move to Florida or whatever, continue being president. I continue to think that he may make Mike Pence president for like the last week of his presidency so that Pence can do the ceremonial stuff and Pence can pardon, the entire Trump crime family. And then he's going to go on to his next money-making scheme because that's all he ever does is, that's his metric for everything is how do you make money off this? And I think, frankly, he's going to either buy one of the marginal right-wing television networks or try to create his own. But he's got this huge list of rubes. I had 4 emails from the Trump campaign asking for money this morning in the first 5 hours of the day, between 5 a.m. and 10 a.m. this morning when I got up at 5, until about 2 hours ago. I got 5 emails from the Trump campaign asking for money. That money is not going to pay for ads. That money is going into the pockets of Donald Trump. I would bet anything. So, Will, I think that's what he's got to figure out. He's got all these names. How can he squeeze more cash out of them?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And I think in his mind, the answer is to basically get all those people to pay him $50 a year or $100 a year to subscribe to an online television network. We'll see. And welcome back. Norman in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Norman, what's up?
Hi, Tom. This is Mike Norman. Basically, I'm concerned that right after the election, we will maybe start seeing tons of people moving away from where they are, especially in big areas like L.A. and New York where there are high costs, and that this will devalue properties that much more and devalue rent. And maybe we can persuade the banks, et cetera, that it's in their interest to make sure that, whoever, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, to pass these bills for $2,000 now, universal basic income, and the PUA, CARES Act, so that before the end of the year, so that people maybe can get money back and not feel like they have to make these kind of moves quickly, right? And I think it's going to happen because people won't have the incentive to stay here after the election when they don't have to worry about voting anymore.
Yeah, in response to the last caller, I was kind of pontificating or prognosticating, I guess, seeing the future of what Trump might do. I think another dimension of that, Norman, is that Donald Trump is a destroyer. He calls himself a builder, and yeah, he builds buildings, but he's also a destroyer. He loves destroying things, particularly things that he hates or he's angry with. Mm-hmm. And if he loses this election, when he loses this election, God willing, he's going to be seriously pissed off. And he's going to want to do the old biblical thing of, you don't just conquer a people, but after you do, you pour salt into their soil so that their crops won't grow. He's going to do everything he can to destroy this country, I believe. And part of that is going to be to refuse to allow any sort of support to go to average Americans who just voted him out of office. Any kind of coronavirus support or subsidy or anything like that. He's just going to fight it. I don't know, and whether the Republicans in the Senate will go along with him is going to be the big question.
Yeah, my sister is even leaving, L.A. to go to, to central, she says a lot of people are leaving L.A. right now, and I think it's just going to pick up even heavier right after the election. And like I said, I think the bank people and other property owners and real estate agencies, they probably should realize that their value of their property depends upon, basically making sure people get money in their hands again to make sure that rents don't go down, because it's just going to get worse for them too. And,
the way that the Trump administration has softened the lobbying and public pressure from the banking sector with regard to things like, because the bank, as you correctly point out, the banksters know they're not going to get their credit cards paid. They're not going to get their mortgages paid. They're not going to get their money back on their home equity loans. They're not going to get anything if people don't have the money to pay them. And therefore, giving people a stimulus is an indirect way of supporting the banksters. But what Trump has done and the Fed is doing is just pouring money into the banksters. I mean, they're the Fed in particular, offering banks functionally zero interest loans. Right. Ad infinitum, and now buying stock. I mean, they're actually buying stock in banks. I mean, buying bonds from banks. They may well be buying the stocks from the banks. I've never seen an actual list of the companies that they're buying stock from, but I understand almost all of them are publicly traded. But they've finessed the politics of it, but I don't know how long they can hold it together. I mean, we'll see. But I suspect that after the election, when there's a clear winner, if that clear winner is the Democrat, God willing, we're going to see a lot of change in America. A lot of change. Stick around. We'll be right back. The hidden history of the war on voting tells how the GOP has been stealing elections for decades and will again this year unless we stop them. So in our latest video for supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, you'll find a riff about a fellow named Errol Graham. He's a 57-year-old African English individual who starved to death recently in the United Kingdom. The neoliberal Thatcher policies are apparently echoing through the British system now in a rather substantial way, the same way that Reaganomics is echoing through the American system. And we've got tens of thousands of Americans who die every year because they lack health care or they can't afford copays and things. And we have literally millions of children in America who are malnourished or even go to bed hungry every night. It's pretty breathtaking stuff. And I think you'll find the rant particularly interesting or useful, and hope you can share it with your friends when you pick it up. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Thanks again for supporting our program. Welcome back. Margie in Millerstown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Margie, what's up?
Hey, I was watching the Trump rally in Florida, and he has them all round up. Melania spoke today, so he's on cloud nine, and he's peppier than ever. But the thing that I wanted to point out about that, the thing that I wanted to point out about this is that, of course, the Antifa came up, as it always does at his rallies, and he actually compared. They all screamed and carried on about Antifa. And he said, no, and Joe Biden just says they're an idea. And then he said, come to think of it, the United States is just an idea. And then they all screamed and carried on about that. And I just don't know if I can wait till Tuesday. I am so upset about this man. And I continue to keep watching him because the more that comes out of his mouth, the more unbelievable it is. And, I just don't see how somebody like him, the con artist and despicable person that he is, can continue to have these people screaming and thinking he's wonderful. And they're holding our whole country.
If you want to understand why and how that is, Margie, you have to watch Fox News, which I don't recommend.
Well,
it's
yeah,
not good for your mental health.
I'm back and forth with them because sure. I'm the type of person that likes to see what's going on over there.
But Margie, if I can, let me tell you what, when Trump says the United States is just an idea, he's actually right. And the point is, and thank you for the call, Margie. Let me just riff on this for a minute. The point is that the thing that differentiates us from, say, Russia, or us from, say, Sweden, or us from, any other country. I mean, basically, we all have an economy, we all have a currency, we all have a government, we all have, manufacturing, we all have consumer economies, we all have churches and religions and all kinds of stuff like that. But what really makes the difference is the idea of how we govern ourselves, the ideals that we hold, the values that we hold. And in the United States, the values that we claim to hold are those that were claimed to be the beacons of the Enlightenment and of the founding of the United States, albeit wildly imperfectly acted out during the first 100 years of our republic, and continuing to be not completely acted out today. But still, these are the ideals that we point to. And other countries point to different ideals. Hey, we believe in strongmen, or we think that security and safety is more important than liberty, or we don't believe that dissenting voices should be allowed to appear on the airwaves, et cetera. So really, sadly, Trump apparently gets that, and so what is he doing? He's going after the idea of America. He's trying to change our core understanding of who we are, and we can't let him get away with that. Lawrence in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Lawrence, thanks for listening to KTNF. What's up?
Hey, well, I just really still a little nervous about this election. I'll tell you why. Because we all, especially as Black Americans, we all need to look back and read up on the compromise of 1877. That was a compromise where, of course, Rutherford B. Hayes, he won the presidency through the Electoral College because he was down by 20 electoral votes. Florida, Louisiana, I think it was South Carolina. They pushed him over the edge with the majority. Yep, exactly, with the majority from the Supreme Court. But the Congress made a compromise, and this is a mirroring what we're doing now. So if Trump wins, there'll be a great compromise, and if the Democrats don't get on board and say, this is our compromise, we want to get rid of Mitch McConnell, we want to get rid of all the judges that he appointed, that would be the compromise. Because, first of all, it's like you just said in your last segment, he's not going to give up, he's not going to leave office, and the Democrats he knows the Democrats are being wishy-washy, and they will always capitulate. So he knows he'll stay in the office, and the Democrats won't do anything about it. And that's where we're going to have a compromise. We need to be prepared for Joe Biden to lose and to have a big compromise that will hurt them.
Yeah, I suspect, Lawrence. I absolutely get what you're saying. You're so right about the compromise of 1877 that stabbed in the back African Americans and the whole idea of Reconstruction. You're absolutely right on that. I'm more inclined, rather than to compromise, to just go to war, to go to battle, political battle with these guys. But we'll see. We'll see how it shakes out. Lawrence, thanks for the call. Very thoughtful call. We'll be right. No, we won't be back. We'll be back tomorrow. It's the end of the show. Same time, same place. In the meantime, be good to yourself and the people around you. Everybody's on edge right now. Everybody's kind of strung out. Take some relaxing time and share some good words with other people. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code TOM. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM.